So picture this. You're sitting at your desk, and a brilliant, just totally original idea flashes into your mind.
The best feeling.
It is.
Yeah.
You write it down, and you're feeling like an absolute genius. But what if that idea wasn't actually yours at all?
Right. What if it belonged to someone else?
Exactly. What if you just read it in some dusty paperback like 10 years ago, and your brain deliberately hid the receipt?
That is a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. So today, we are doing a deep dive into this fascinating, really early psychological text that digs into the hidden depths of the human mind. We're looking at the machinery of memory and this phenomenon known as cryptomnesia.
Right. Which basically just translates to hidden memory.
Yeah. And our mission today is to figure out where our ideas actually come from. We're going to look at how our unconscious brain acts like this massive invisible library and explore that razor-thin line between creative genius and a simple trick of the mind.
It's just a phenomenal piece of writing because it fundamentally challenges our sense of ownership over our own thoughts. I mean, the author is operating in that era of early psychoanalysis. So think along the lines of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud.
Right, when they were really just starting to map things out.
Exactly. They were first starting to map out the sheer scale of the unconscious. And the text points out that to understand how massive creative breakthroughs happen, we first have to understand how memory tricks us in incredibly mundane ways.
Yeah, the everyday stuff.
Yeah. So right out of the gate, the text draws a crucial line between direct and indirect memory.
Okay, so direct memory feels pretty straightforward, I think. You consciously look at a house while you're on a walk, and you remember, oh, hey, my friend used to live there.
Right.
The visual cue comes in, your conscious mind processes it, and it just pulls up the relevant file.
Yeah, the text actually calls this having the quality of being known.
Quality of being known, right.
You are actively aware that you are remembering a fact.
But indirect memory is, it's a lot stealthier.
Much stealthier.
Yeah. The source material gives this great scenario. You're walking down that exact same street, but this time you're completely absorbed in a really complex business problem.
You're just totally in your own head.
Exactly. You walk right past your friend's old house without consciously looking at it at all. And suddenly, just out of nowhere, you remember a totally random, unimportant conversation you had with that friend years ago.
About a similar business issue. Right?
Yes. And you have no idea why that specific memory just surfaced.
Until you look up.
Right, until you look up and realize, oh, wait, I'm standing right in front of their old house.
It's wild. The visual perception still happened. It just, slipped through the back door.
Yeah.
It bypassed your active attention, sank into the dark background of your mind, and triggered the memory anyway.
But because the visual cue of the house was too weak to force its way into your conscious thought, it had to piggyback on whatever you were already thinking about.
Right, the business problem.
Exactly, to finally grab your attention. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. It's almost like having background apps running on your phone.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, like you're staring at an email, entirely focused, but an unseen app triggers a notification about something completely different because it's quietly tracking your location data in the background.
That is exactly what's happening. The unconscious is essentially doing exactly what our consciousness does. It's constantly seeking out associations to make sense of the world.
It sees the house and asks, who lived here?
Right, just like your conscious mind would. It just does all of that heavy lifting in the dark. And, well, this leads to one of the most provocative claims in the text.
Okay.
The author argues there is no such thing as a chance idea.
Not at all.
None. They use the German word Einfall. It means a sudden, fortuitous thought that just pops into your head. According to this framework, those do not exist.
Wow.
Every single psychic process is strictly determined by a previous chain of associations.
And they back this up with these really great examples of people whistling, which I love.
Yes, the whistling examples.
There's this story of a man whistling a tune, and when someone asks him what it is, he realizes it's an old student song.
With very specific lyrics.
Right. The lyrics are, not a cent, and my clothes are only lent.
Which is so telling.
It is. Because he traces his mental steps backward and realizes he had just been feeling incredibly anxious about a grand settlement of accounts for the upcoming new year.
His brain essentially queued up a soundtrack for his financial anxiety without his permission.
It's like his own personal subconscious DJ. And there's another example, too, of a guy whose friends figured out he was going through a terrible breakup.
Oh, right, because of what he was whistling.
Yeah, over the course of 10 minutes, he subconsciously whistled 3 different tragic Swiss love songs.
Including one literally called Forlorn. Forlorn am I.
You can't make it up.
No, you can't. A feeling-toned train of thought can completely vanish from your active awareness, but it still retains enough residual energy to send up an idea.
Or a melody.
Exactly, a melody that seems entirely disconnected from your current environment.
I do have to push back on this a little bit, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Is it really scientifically fair to say absolutely no thought is a chance idea? I mean, doesn't the brain ever just throw out random static?
Well,
There are billions of neurons firing. Sometimes things must just misfire without some deep, poetic reason behind them, right?
right. I mean, modern neuroscience would certainly leave room for random neural noise. But within the framework of this early psychological text, what we casually dismiss as static is simply our unconscious attempting to resolve tension.
So the meaning is there, we just can't see it.
Exactly. We just lack the self-awareness to see the connecting threads. The argument is that the static always has a source, a reason, and a specific trigger.
Even if that trigger is buried incredibly deep.
Even then, we see the puppet moving, but we can't see the strings.
Okay, but it's one thing when this unconscious library makes you whistle a sad tune. That's harmless.
Right.
But it becomes genuinely dangerous when those hidden memories start pulling the strings of our physical behavior without our consent.
Yes, and the source material talks about this using the historical concept of hysteria.
Right. And we should probably ground that term for the listener, because hysteria is largely an antiquated medical diagnosis today.
Yeah, it is. The text is using it almost as a caricature to demonstrate how everyday psychological mechanisms operate when put under extreme, unbearable stress.
It magnifies those invisible strings so we can actually see the tension on them.
Exactly.
And the story they use to illustrate this is brutal.
It's very intense.
Yeah. The author was out for a walk with a young woman who had a history of severe trauma. She'd been violently beaten by her father.
Right.
And during the walk, her cloak slipped off and fell into the dirt. The author, just trying to be a nice guy, trying to be helpful, picked it up and hit it with his walking stick to knock the dust off.
And her reaction to that completely shatters normal social convention.
She violently attacks him.
Yeah.
She hurls herself at him with her hands up in defense, rips the cloak away, and says she absolutely cannot stand the sight of it.
And when the author asks her to explain what just happened,
She is totally nonplussed.
Yeah.
She has no rational explanation to give him. She just says it was extremely unpleasant to see the fabric being hit that way.
Sigmund Freud actually called these symptomatic actions.
Right.
This is a textbook manifestation of what the text calls a feeling-toned memory complex.
A complex.
Right. Think of a complex as a bundle where an intense emotion is permanently fused to a specific memory.
Like the abuse.
Exactly. The memory of the father's physical abuse was not active in her conscious mind on that walk, but from its hidden seat in the unconscious, that trauma hijacked her motor functions the second it was triggered.
The visual of the stick hitting the fabric.
Yes. It completely bypassed the logical, executive functioning part of her brain, what we'd call the prefrontal cortex today.
Right, and went straight to the amygdala.
Straight to the survival mechanism. She didn't think, she just reacted to an invisible threat.
So what does this actually mean for someone listening to this right now? I mean, if extreme trauma can hijack the brain's circuitry that aggressively, what is the everyday equivalent for someone just going about their normal life, dealing with normal stress?
Well, the text offers a fairly sobering perspective on human autonomy, to be honest.
Okay.
It claims our consciousness fairly swarms with strange intruders.
Swarms with intruders. That's a creepy image.
It is. Thousands of associations cross the threshold of our conscious mind every single day. And if we were forced to interrogate them, we wouldn't be able to explain where half of them came from.
Because the vast majority of our psyche exists entirely in the dark.
Exactly. We all harbor an immense number of these strange psychic complexes. The only thing protecting us from acting on them constantly is the heavy inhibition of our waking logical mind.
And I guess when we go to sleep and those inhibitions shut down, the unconscious just runs wild,
Exactly.
bringing up bizarre symbols and playing games that our waking selves would find completely baffling or horrifying.
And that lack of inhibition in dreams is actually a perfect bridge to the next major concept in the text.
Which is the pursuit of creativity, right?
Yes. Because the unconscious mind is so vast, so powerful, and holds on to every single impression we've ever had, creative people actively try to tap into this dangerous territory to find new ideas.
And the author makes a really sweeping claim here. They argue that all new ideas and all new combinations of ideas are premeditated by the unconscious.
Every single one.
Yeah. When your conscious mind approaches a problem with a wish, say, a desire to paint something groundbreaking or invent a new tool, it was actually the unconscious that generated that wish in the first place.
Right.
And the unconscious will ultimately serve up the fulfillment of it.
But the text is very careful to point out a caveat here. True originality only exists in the combination of psychic elements, never in the material itself.
Okay, explain that.
They use Michelangelo's statues as an example,
Oh, right.
noting how the specific muscular structures, the arms, the noses, were all somehow prefigured in classical antiquity.
He didn't invent the arm.
Exactly. Or consider someone who is incredibly well-spoken. They often speak like a book, fluidly deploying perfectly structured 8-line sentences they absorbed from something they recently read.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This is remarkably similar to how we train AI models today.
Oh, definitely.
Like, a large language model doesn't actually know anything, and it definitely doesn't know it's plagiarizing an artist from the 1800s.
Right.
It just ingests billions of data points, pixel patterns, vocabulary, sentence structures,
Yeah.
and when you give it a prompt, it statistically predicts the most effective combination of those old elements to fulfill your request.
The brain is basically the original biological LLM.
Yes. We ingest everything we see and read, and our unconscious serves up a predictive collage. It's like playing with a giant box of Lego bricks. You might build a spaceship no one has ever seen, but you didn't invent the bricks.
That's a great way to put it. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, nature doesn't like to build from scratch.
It's too much work.
Generating entirely novel biological or cognitive material from nothing is incredibly energy intensive. It is far more efficient to build laboriously on what already exists.
So where does it go wrong for the creator?
The danger for the creative person arises when the unconscious hands them a brilliant new combination of old material, but that combination lacks the quality of being known.
They don't feel the memory attached to the data.
Right, because the unconscious hands it over fully formed and stripped of its original context, the creator becomes enchanted.
Enchanted by what the text calls the deceptive gifts of the psyche.
Exactly. They genuinely believe they have summoned something entirely novel from the ether.
Wow.
The text warns that without rigorous, almost paranoid self-criticism, we easily fall into this trap.
Because the human desire to be a totally original genius is incredibly intoxicating.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us to the highest stakes example in the entire deep dive.
Yes, this is the best part.
We are moving from the abstract theory of hidden memories to a historical mystery involving one of the most famous philosophers who ever lived, falling straight into this cryptomnesia trap.
We are talking about Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yes, we are.
The author of our source material caught an unbelievable literary parallel in Nietzsche's philosophical masterpiece, Thus Spake Zarathustra.
There's this very specific surreal passage where Nietzsche's describing Zarathustra descending into hell.
Right.
He writes that Zarathustra goes down through the mouth of a smoking volcano. And right around that exact time, a ship anchors at the island, and the crew goes ashore to shoot rabbits.
To shoot rabbits. It is such a striking image, but the author reading it felt that bizarre quality of being known.
They knew they'd seen it before.
They knew they had seen this exact sequence of events before.
So after racking their brain, the author dug up an antiquated, fairly obscure book of Swabian ghost stories by a writer named Justinus Kerner.
The book is called Blätter aus Prevorst.
Right, and inside, there is a story about a merchant at Mount Stromboli. The merchant and 4 captains muster their crew to go ashore, and they suddenly witness 2 flying men descending into the burning crater of the terrible volcano.
And what specifically had the crew gone to the island to do?
They went ashore to shoot rabbits.
The wording is almost a carbon copy.
It's identical.
The specific volcano setting, the flying men descending into the crater as an entrance to the underworld, and that highly specific, entirely mundane detail of the crew shooting rabbits.
Okay, look, I am struggling with this rabbit hunting detail.
Why is that?
Because if I am Friedrich Nietzsche and I am writing a profound, era-defining philosophical masterpiece about the nature of humanity and the descent into the underworld, why on earth would I steal a line about hunting rabbits?
It's a fair question.
It completely muddles the metaphor. It doesn't make any sense unless it's an accident. Like, did he just consciously plagiarize this ghost story and forget to edit out the weird parts?
Well, the text breaks down exactly why the plagiarism theory falls apart under scrutiny, and you just hit the nail on the head.
Oh, okay.
The strongest piece of evidence defending Nietzsche's integrity is the rabbits.
Really?
Yes. The detail is completely superfluous to his artistic intention. It serves absolutely no narrative or philosophical purpose in Zarathustra. As you said, it makes the profound description of descending into hell feel disjointed.
Yeah, it distracts from the point.
If you are going to consciously steal a heavy metaphor for a descent into the underworld, you edit out the random rabbit hunters. You steal the gold, you don't steal the dirt stuck to it.
Oh, that makes total sense. And the author actually did the historical legwork on this too, right?
Yes, they did. They contacted Nietzsche's sister.
Wow. And she confirmed the timeline.
She did.
Nietzsche did read Justinus Kerner's book, but he read it while staying with his grandfather between the ages of 12 and 15.
As a young teenager.
Right. And later in his life, Nietzsche suffered from severely weak eyes and had to be incredibly economical with his reading.
Extremely careful.
It is practically impossible that he wasted his limited eyesight revisiting a book of childish ghost stories during his heavy philosophical years.
It was pure cryptomnesia. That invisible library in his mind pulled a file from when he was a young teenager.
And because it lacked the quality of being known, he experienced it as divine inspiration.
Exactly, an entirely original Einfall. But it was strictly determined by a text he consumed decades prior.
Okay, we have to talk about how this is actually physically possible. How does a human brain reproduce a story with such stunning verbal fidelity decades later?
It's hard to believe.
I routinely forget why I walked into the kitchen, let alone a throwaway line from a ghost story I read when I was in middle school.
Well, the source material dives into the physiological mechanisms behind this. The core claim is that the brain never actually forgets any impression, no matter how slight.
Never.
Never. Every sensory input, every word you read, every conversation you overhear leaves a fine, permanent physical trace in the neural architecture of the memory.
But our daily experience is constant forgetting. I mean, we lose information all the time.
Right, our consciousness forgets. The text uses a brilliant metaphor for this. Consciousness operates with an unending loss, much like the Bank of England destroying old banknotes every single day.
Oh, wow.
Your executive functioning, your prefrontal cortex, shreds the daily receipts to keep the desk clear so you can focus on immediate survival and tasks.
Because if you were consciously aware of every memory you ever formed, you would be paralyzed by the cognitive load.
Completely paralyzed. But those hidden traces remain intact in the deep vaults of the brain.
So under what conditions does the bouncer leave the door? Like, how do those vaults actually open back up?
It requires special physiological conditions, specifically abnormal ecstatic mental states, fever, or the process of dying.
When the system breaks down.
Right. When the brain's executive functioning breaks down or is overwhelmed, the filters disappear.
The text gives some truly startling medical examples to back this up, actually.
Yes, the clinical cases.
They describe an old man, described as a man of low station who had no formal education, who suddenly began speaking fluent Greek on his deathbed.
Fluent Greek.
Yeah, and when they investigated his past, they found out that as a young child, Greek verses had been aggressively drummed into him simply so he could serve as a prop to shame a lazy, wealthy pupil.
That is incredibly sad.
It is. He hadn't spoken or consciously thought about those Greek words in a lifetime. But as his brain was shutting down and the prefrontal cortex went offline, the vault opened and the audio perfectly played back.
And there's a similar case study of a dying maidservant who began reciting complex Bible verses in the original Greek and Hebrew.
Which makes no sense on the surface.
No one could figure out how she knew them. Until they learned she used to work for a priest who had a habit of pacing the halls after meals, reading aloud in those languages.
And she was just cleaning the floors nearby.
Exactly, not actively trying to learn Hebrew, but her brain recorded the sensory input with perfect fidelity.
Okay, this brings us to a really dark intersection in the text. If extreme ecstasy and abnormal neurological states pull up these exact, unedited memories, what is the actual dividing line between a creative genius like Nietzsche and someone who has simply lost their grip on reality?
That is the big question.
I mean, if both are just accessing the vault, how are they different?
This raises an important question, and it is the crux of the text's conclusion. Both the genius and the insane person access the exact same deep, forgotten neural traces.
The physiological mechanism of the vault opening is identical.
Yes. The difference entirely lies in what the remaining consciousness does with the material.
What they build with it.
Right. The text contrasts Nietzsche with the case of a feeble-minded girl who obsessively rattled off the exact details of the hospital warders' families.
Their children's names, the arrangement of the furniture in their rooms.
Exactly. She was accessing perfect hidden memory, but the text dismisses it as morbid rubbish.
Because in insanity, or when the brain is dying, the cerebral cortex is just drowsily firing without any coordination.
Right.
It's an automated, meaningless data dump of the archives. It's like a broken pipe flooding a basement with information.
But the genius doesn't just let the water flood the basement.
They build the turbine.
Exactly. Nietzsche himself described his periods of inspiration as a state where a thought flashed up like lightning. He felt like he was a mere mouthpiece for an almighty power, overwhelmed by the automatism of his unconscious mind handing him these images.
But a genius has the executive strength to fetch those distant, chaotic fragments and integrate them into a new, profound, and meaningful structure.
They apply architectural rigor to the cryptomnesia.
They route the geyser to power a city.
Exactly.
Well, to wrap up this deep dive, it is wild to realize that we are essentially massive walking libraries of forgotten fragments.
We really are.
Every single idea we have, every creative spark, is heavily influenced by the invisible machinery of an unconscious mind that remembers every single thing we've ever perceived, even when our conscious mind is busy shredding the receipts.
We are built entirely upon the sediment of our past impressions, whether we are consciously aware of them or not. Nature iterates. It rarely invents from nothing.
So the next time you have a sudden flash of brilliant inspiration, or an idea that seems to elegantly solve a problem you've been stuck on, take a second to rigorously interrogate it.
Ask yourself where it came from.
Exactly. Are you truly combining things in a groundbreaking new way? Or is your inner archivist simply handing you an unlabeled file from your childhood?
It requires a profound, almost uncomfortable level of self-criticism to know the difference between the two.
It really does. And I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. If our conscious waking mind is just a tiny, forgetful fraction of our total psyche, and the unconscious is the true author and compiler of our ideas, how much of what you consider your own entirely unique personality is actually just a collage of forgotten memories?
That's a deep thought.
Think back to that brilliant original idea you were so sure was yours. Are you the author of your own mind? Or are you just a very enthusiastic reader of a book you completely forgot you read?